Israeli forces have severed northern Gaza from the rest of the besieged territory and pounded it with intense airstrikes overnight, setting the stage for an expected push into the dense confines of Gaza City and an even bloodier phase of the month-old war. Today is Tuesday, November 7th, 2023, and this is the Dunkley Report. Israeli forces have severed northern Gaza from the rest of the besieged territory and pounded it with intense airstrikes overnight, setting the stage for an expected push into the dense confines of Gaza City and an even bloodier phase of the month-old war. Already, the Palestinian death toll passed 10,000, according to the health ministry in Hamas-run Gaza. The ministry does not distinguish between fighters and civilians. Some 1,400 Israelis have died, mostly civilians killed in the October 7th incursion by Hamas. That started the war. The figures mark a grim milestone in what has quickly become the deadliest round of Israeli-Palestinian violence since Israel's establishment 75 years ago. Israeli troops have divided the northern and southern parts of Gaza as communications across the besieged territory were temporarily cut Monday for a third time since the war started. Israeli media reported the troops are expected to enter Gaza City on Monday or Tuesday, the Hamas-run health ministry. In Gaza says the Palestinian death toll has now exceeded 10,000. The developments came as an Israeli strike early Monday hit the roof of Gaza City's Shifa hospital, killing a number of displaced people sheltering on its top floor and destroying solar panels. Israel has so far rejected U.S. suggestions that it take a humanitarian pause from its relentless bombardment of Gaza and the rising civilian deaths. More than 1,400 people in Israel have been killed. A defiant Donald Trump has sparred with a New York judge and slammed the state attorney general suing him, using the witness stand at his civil fraud trial to defend his riches and lash out at a case that imperils his real estate empire. The former president testified Monday in a lawsuit accusing him of fraudulently inflating his net worth in financial statements to lenders and others. He suggested the judge hearing the case was biased against him, and he called the state attorney general who brought the case a political hack. The testy exchanges underscored Trump's unwillingness to adapt his famously freewheeling rhetorical style to a formal courtroom setting. He denies all wrongdoing. Florida is the third largest state in the nation, yet it has never fielded a winning presidential candidate. Nationally known politicians like former Governor Jeb Bush and senators Bob Graham and Marco Rubio have tried and failed. Former President Donald Trump changed his residence after first winning office as a New Yorker, then lost in his bid for a second term. This year, he and Republican Governor Ron DeSantis could break that slump. Andrew Jackson was Florida's first territorial governor, but it was a short stint he took on as a favor to President James Monroe. He didn't run for president until he was back home in Tennessee. Two senators from Maine are asking the U.S. Army Inspector General to provide a full accounting of interactions with a reservist before he killed 18 people at a bowling alley and bar. U.S. Senators Susan Collins and Angus King told Lieutenant General Donna Martin in a letter Monday that it's important to understand what occurred or failed to occur at the federal level, including the Army. The senators posed several questions, including under what circumstances the Army reports personnel to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. Fellow soldiers expressed concerns about Robert Card's mental health before the October 25th shootings. An Army spokesperson confirmed that the letter was received and that the Inspector General will work towards getting a response. The Supreme Court is hearing arguments in a challenge to a 1994 law prohibiting people facing domestic violence restraining orders from having guns. Tuesday's case is the first involving guns to reach the justices since last year's landmark decision expanding gun rights. Ruth Glenn knows the danger of putting a gun in the hands of a violent spouse or partner. Glenn was shot 3 times outside a Denver car wash in 1992. The shooter was Glenn's estranged husband, who was under a court order to stay away from her. 2 years later, Congress enacted a law to keep people like Glenn's husband from having guns. A Texas man is challenging the law. Survivors of an earthquake that flattened villages in Nepal's northwest mountains have been searching through the debris of their collapsed homes for any salvageable belongings as aid trickles into the remote area. The strong temblor late on Friday killed 157 people and injured 256, leaving thousands homeless. Authorities rushed food, tents, medicine, and other supplies to the villages on Monday, as rescue and search teams said they were wrapping up their efforts. In the village of Chapare, people were moving piles of rocks and logs that used to be their homes, looking for anything they could salvage. 5 hostages of Hamas are free, offering some hope to the families of more than 200 others snatched in southern Israel during the militants' deadly rampage on October 7th. The families of those still in captivity have questions such as why progress has been so slow and why some and not others are being released. Israel on Monday announced its first hostage rescue, that of Army Private Ori Megiddish. Hamas had earlier released Judith and Natalie Ranan, mother and daughter, and Yocheved Lifshitz, 85, along with 79-year-old Nurit Cooper. Hamas has said it would let the others go in return for thousands of Palestinian prisoners held by Israel, which has dismissed the offer. After more than a week of public pressure from the U.S. for humanitarian pauses in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is allowing that his government might be open to only little pauses in its assault on Hamas. The Israeli leader sought to play down differences with President Joe Biden, his country's most vocal backer on the world stage. Biden used his first conversation with Netanyahu in 8 days to repeat in private his public calls for lulls in the fighting, to allow civilians to flee Israel's campaign to crush Hamas, and for humanitarian aid to flow to hundreds of thousands in need. Attorneys representing a former player suing the Chicago Blackhawks are speaking out. They say their client is a former player who was sexually abused by the team's former video coach. They say the player was inspired to come forward by another player who earlier sued the team over the same allegations and reached a settlement in 2021. Both players say the Blackhawks responded inadequately to their complaints of abuse and harassment, The allegations date to 2010, when Chicago won the Stanley Cup. Today's news was reported by the Associated Press. This has been the World News for Tuesday, November 7th, 2023. Thanks again for joining us at the Dunkley Report.